Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and while watching the entirety of Naruto for the second time, I ended up thinking a lot about the story beats, the story arcs, and the characters caught up in both. Generally speaking, I came into my rewatch expecting to be far less enamored by what Kishimoto's writing turned eons-long anime adaptation had to say about all of that, as well as the shinobi world all of that operates in. But what happened was, as the title suggests, a mix of seeing far more artistry in how certain narratives come across, while also seeing far more problems in how some of those same narratives evolve. These far too many thoughts I've collected may or may not turn into a slew of videos on the current state of my feelings on the series as a whole, but at the very least, I wanted to start, or rather continue from where my Hinata video left off, by discussing one of my other favorite characters in this franchise. Rock Lee is a man of several nicknames and several very clear inspirations, aesthetically and beyond, but the first thing that always sticks out to me with regards to both him and Guy Sensei is how immediately jarring they are compared to the world they find themselves in. It's clearly an intentional choice, as it pertains to the tone they bring and the specifics of their designs that further carry said tone. The juxtaposition is hilarious, but also fitting. Their entire deal, after all, is how relatively untalented they are at doing the ninja thing, since at their core, they are martial artists with very few magic tricks. And that's what I love about them. Their fight, in more ways than one, is to prove that despite everything we can observe, they belong here, and not in, say, Shaolin Showdown, for example, where nothing about them would be jarring in the slightest. Their unfettered, unadulterated, uncompromisable sense of determination and inner strength guides them, because nothing else and no one else really can. They're not out here trying to move mountains or become Hokage, though Guy could probably do at least one of those things. They just want to know that they can hold up against the natural genius that defines some of their peers and their rivals, regardless of how willing those rivals are to carry that designation. And if their odd yet mostly functional blend of hyperbolic humor and reckless abandon fighting style was the only thing they had going for them, I think they would still be among the better conceived characters here. But some choice bigger moments for them, but specifically for Lee, beg a lot of questions the story isn't especially interested in answering, which naturally takes us to the Chunin exams. To start us off here, I don't think the incongruency of the Rock Lee Gaara dynamic this fight insisted on is that big of a problem, if one at all. It almost works, but then the story quickly realized, in a very, very blunt way that is so quintessential Naruto, that Naruto himself was always more of the true other side of that coin. If anything, Rock Lee is more of a natural opposing force to Sasuke early on than Gaara, as the story routinely enforces Lee's frustration with catching up to those who he views as naturally gifted. But the intricacies of how families and inborn advantages create the foundational social structure of Konoha, and by extension, create a lot of the core conflicts in this series, is something we'll need to save for another day. That's a bit too much of a sidebar for a Rock Lee video. The actual fight itself is a high bar for shonen beat-em-ups that has undeniably stood the test of time to become one of the most fondly remembered moments in a series full of them. And it's more apparent here than anywhere else how much inspiration Kishimoto took from Akira Toriyama, whose work on Dragon Ball helped push Kishimoto towards the manga industry. Granted, he wasn't originally planning on becoming one of the biggest names in this specific sector of manga, but after several bumps in the path, he took one last shot at doing the shonen thing. As such, he reworked his original concept for Naruto, it took off quickly, and the rest is history. But point being, it's a great watch, and chances are if you're watching this video, you don't need me to tell you that. But where my mixed feelings really start is the fight's aftermath, as well as everything that comes and doesn't come of it. Rock Lee losing the fight is rightfully regarded as one of the biggest early gut punches of the series. Not just because he seemed to have a good chance at pulling off the upset, at least based on not knowing about Shukaku yet, but also because, again at the time, it seemed like his shinobi dream was coming to an abrupt end. For the first time in the series, there's a twinge of disconcerting horror built into his life mantra, as he remains poised to keep fighting onwards even while technically passed out and unable to use an arm and a leg. That horror is witnessed firsthand by his overbearing sensei who, also presumably for the first time, feels genuine regret at turning his cherished pupil into a killing machine who would sooner be killed himself than falter on the very lessons Guy instilled. Even Kakashi is noticeably disturbed by the lengths Guy went to, with a smile on his face no less, in order to push Lee beyond his limits as a reflection of his own goals. It's bleak, it's painful, and it would be an amazing angle for the story to continue to delve into, especially as it pertains to how both characters work through a situation that clearly never occurred to them before now. But then the story ignores most of that. To clarify, they don't necessarily make light of what Lee is going through. His inability to hold on to that perky positive outlook is as evident as his myriad of doubts, but at no point does he ever have the chance to consider the bigger picture, or a reality beyond his obsession with his single-minded goal. And Guy can't really put him in that position, because he's too busy living vicariously through his unofficial son. Lee not getting to be a ninja anymore would be just as much his failure as anything else, but the problem is that said failure isn't framed as a result of the circumstances that actually led to this point, which are, as we've mentioned, Guy's own teachings. So the guilt he at one point felt is tossed aside rather quickly in favor of a standard never give up on your dreams monologue, which only serves to lionize the same ideas that created the situation Guy was once guilty about. There's no real sense that this duo actually learned anything, or took anything of value away from interacting with Gaara. There's really no "this is what it's like for a ninja" moment as the Land of Waves arc spoke to. And it's here, where how Rock Lee functions in this story ends up being so diametrically opposed to what the series is and eventually will become more about. Speaking against the emotionally stunted, politically backwards, conflict-driven state of the current world that historically over-idolizes powerful ninja simply for being powerful. So it becomes somewhat awkward to see key moments framed as hopeful, when really, the most tragic thing about Lee to me is that he'll never end up seeing the forest beyond the trees. Everything his sensei was is the only thing he'll ever consider, right through adulthood. All this, despite the story pointing out how uncomfortable Lee's situation is, and Guy himself recognizing how regrettable some of his actions were. None of this is truly allowed to stand, because Lee has to heal up and go fight a man with, incidentally, freakier bones in the state his were once in, all while drunk. Because Jackie Chan. And then the man that nearly killed him shows up, evoking what I'd charitably call N emotion. All of this works great in the vacuum of Rock Lee being a running gag of blunt force Chinese film references. But again, set against everything we know about him, it comes off like the story wasn't willing to allow the character who fought so hard just to be here, again, to have any form of introspection. So many others, but especially Sasuke and Shikamaru, just to name a few, have to keep looking both inward and outward at the realities they face in this world. And that's even before they slowly come to realize that their world does need major changes actually. Changes that Naruto does eventually lead. The same Naruto who very notably adjusts his own dream as a direct result of being forced to think more about what the role of Hokage really means. But neither Lee nor his sensei are afforded a chance that even Neji got in limited screen time, despite the story of Naruto consistently proving that engaging more critically with your goals doesn't always mean giving up on them. This next point likely isn't related to an inability to consolidate those ideas, but it's a very fitting anecdote. In 2010, Naruto's publisher Shueisha basically dropped the pretense and gave Taira Kanji, one of Kishimoto's assistants, a lighter-toned comedic Rock Lee spin-off story to work on. So for as much as Rock Lee does belong here on a literal level, on many other levels, even ones independent of the mainline story, he'll never quite fit in, for better and for worse. Because the way one of the consistently most popular characters is written for will gladly backtrack in order to keep him doing the thing for as long as people will read it. Even if doing the thing at one point is just a battle against himself. A battle that essentially means nothing to the story at present, and even less to him, beyond a surface level read of his self-destructive methods of self-improvement. They didn't bring Lee back into the fold because they wanted to keep exploring or continuing his personal story. They brought him back so they could keep selling his increasingly worrying mindset that is never ever allowed to be challenged, even when everyone else's mindsets are. To be clear, I don't find this to be some irredeemable weakness in the storytelling, but to me, it does weaken the story. I still love Rock Lee, and in the aftermath of my biggest issues with Guy Sensei, he became one of Shippuden's MVPs many times over. But to close, I'd like to present a contrast to the way Lee was handled all those years ago by talking briefly about a ninja I like less, but love the writing for more. One of my all-time favorite episodes of the now 3 and counting Naruto shows out there is The Last Mission. It comes to us from Konoha Hiden, A Perfect Day for a Wedding, a light novel that ended up being adapted into the last few episodes of the Shippuden anime. This would mark the first of 2 instances so far where author Sho Hinata's work made it into the hands of Studio Pierrot's animators. I love many of these episodes, but this one most of all, because it demands an answer to the very question that Lee never really gets the chance to be asked. But not as a result of some shinobi falling out or serious injury. That would have been fine too, and it would have made for an even more fitting contrast. But I liked it more because one of the most intelligent, level-headed, and capable young shinobi in the village casts his own doubts about where his life is going, now that everyone else seems to have a clearer idea of that than he does. Even the usual bluntness of the writing works better here, because Shino is characterized as an over-explainer, something I can obviously relate to. His decision to follow what might be his true calling in teaching is a serious highlight to me, not just because I myself work in education and was a teacher, though that bias will always be there, but because questioning his desire to be a ninja, in spite of being really good at it, isn't framed as a failing on his part. It's not something he has to curse out his family for or rearrange his priorities to commit to. He simply felt directionless. So, instead of continuing to follow the comfortable path he's known since birth, he listens to his intuition, as well as his former teacher, and figures it's at least worth a try. But then, even years later, Boruto's anime doesn't forget that the road he chose isn't one he's completely sold on, because he never even considered teaching before that flash of inspiration. So even as a fully grown adult, he's still having a bit of imposter syndrome when he struggles to connect with the next generation. And paying attention to such a relatively tiny detail inside the mammoth that is Naruto's story is among the many reasons I find the next generation's anime underrated. But that too is a whole other conversation. All of this to say, I found Shino's inner conflict of career choices to be a very well put together little story, and a lot of my praise for that speaks to my critiques against the way Rock Lee's situation played out when his career was the one in question. It's more than just hollow mantras and Tsunade dropping in just in the nick of time with a cure-all. More than any of that, it's just really telling to me how little about his personal philosophy adjusts while housed inside a broader story that revolves around how significant and necessary change is. Rather, after receiving a hard dose of reality, the solution is to reassure him that dreams aren't supposed to change, and further contemplation is for squares. It's not that Rock Lee doesn't, well, rock as a gutsy, sheer force of will underdog ninja with a highlight reel fight that almost certainly makes AMV artists blush to this day. And in general, I think Kishimoto has a real genuine talent for highlighting the best aspects of his plethora of characters, Lee very much included. But what really makes my feelings about Lee mixed is that even when pressed, that was all he ever had the chance to be. And that, more than his aesthetic, more than his spin-off, and more than the personal quirks he inherited from Guy, is really what creates this tangible rift between him and the shinobi world. A world he only sort of has to face. And with that, let me know your thoughts on the handsome devil of the hidden leaf, and if you're feeling real creative, let me know what you think would be a good topic to delve into next, preferably after clicking the like button. I've got just a flood of Naruto thoughts practically spilling out of my ears right now, so might as well create conversations about it. And until then, thanks for watching.